Hi guys, welcome to another MTM video. Today we've got a 2009 Ford Fiesta that's in with a clonk noise from the front. So we've just put it up on the lift and let's go take a look. And on the driver's side front, straight away we can see broken coil spring. So yeah, let's get started and start replacing it.
First things first is remove the wheel, and then also everything that you're going to be taking off, it's a good idea to put WD-40 on it so that it comes off nice and easy. While the threads are soaking, you can remove all the ABS wiring from the strut just to make sure it's not in the way later on. When you're trying to remove the anti-roll bar link nut, the whole thread might rotate with it, so it's a good idea to also have an Allen key so that you can remove it nice and easy. And we'll just remove this nut holding the brake flexi. And when we're done with that, we can just tuck it out of the way just so it doesn't get damaged when we remove the strut. With the anti-roll bar detached from the strut, it's a good idea to put the nut back on the thread so that way you don't lose it later on. It's a case of gunning off these two nuts and bolts holding the hub assembly to the strut. When it does come away from the strut, you want to be careful that it doesn't come too far towards you because you might pull the drive shaft out of the gearbox. It's rare, but it does happen. Same as the anti-roll bar link, it's a good idea to put the nuts back on the threads so that way you don't lose them later on. A bit of a wiggle and the hub will come away from the strut, but remember, just be careful that you don't want it to come towards you, and you can set it to one side whilst you work on the strut. So the only thing left holding the strut onto the car are these three nuts. They should be able to get easy enough with a ratchet. Leave the one nut that's easiest to get at until last. That way you can loosen it off by hand on the final threads and you can guide it out without it dropping. So with your strut safely secured into a vise, you want to attach the spring compressors. You're going to be very careful with these because there's a lot of pressure that's being compressed and you don't want this to release on you, so never have it facing towards you when you're compressing. Always have it facing away from you. So when you're removing the spring, you don't have to compress it all the way down. All you want to do is take the tension off that top mount. All this does is so make sure that you can remove that top mount safely without tension on it. When removing the top mount, it's also a good idea just to check the bearing, just to make sure that that's all running smoothly before you put it all back together and realize you need to replace that as well. But also a good idea is to see if there's any kind of offset in the threads, because sometimes it'll only go in one way and that can cause you issues when you're trying to refit later on. So here we've got our above coil spring, and we want to use this so we can compare it to the new coil spring before it goes on, because sometimes each side of the coil spring is sometimes a slightly different shape, so you want to make sure that it goes on the right way when refitting the new spring. But when compressing the new spring, you want to be really careful, because now you're going to have to compress it all the way down so that you can refit everything back together, but be aware that there's a lot of tension on that spring, and if it releases, then it's coming out quickly. Before fitting the top mount, just remember that the coil spring sits in a specific place, so that there's probably going to be cutouts that matches the coil spring, so you want to make sure that it's in the correct location before you tighten everything down. All you're aiming to do is compress it enough so you can get this top mount on and then thread on the nut. Start the threads off by hand, but then you can use an ink back gun to carry on down the thread. But also be aware that when you reach the bottom, all of it will rotate because there's no pressure on the system. So what you might want to do is loosen off the tension on the coil spring so that there's pressure on that top mount, and then you might be able to nip it up just to make sure that it's tight. When you're happy it's tight, it's time to refit back to the car. Feed the strut back around the hub, being careful not to damage the brake plexi. When it's in position, you can line up the holes at the top of the strut. I like to catch a nut on these threads first, just to make sure that everything is in the correct place. But be aware that sometimes on different types of struts that these can be offset, so they'll only go in one way. Remember to be careful when you're manoeuvring the hub around, but it's easy enough just to get it back into its place, and you can slot the bolts back through, so it's not going to go anywhere. Again, it's a good idea to start all of these threads off by hand before you start ratcheting them up, and also make sure that everything is as it was before, so everything's in the correct place, it's run the correct way, so that way you won't have any issues when turning the wheel, nothing's going to catch. Even though we are gunning some of these nuts and bolts back on, it's always a good idea to go over it with a ratchet just to make sure that everything's tight. When you're happy that everything's tight and as it should be, then make sure that the ABS wiring is fed through in its proper place so it doesn't catch the wheel when it's rotating. and then you can put the wheel back on, double check everything's tight up the top, and then go on road test. Always remember, every wheel that comes off has to be torqued. There's specific torque settings for every vehicle, so you can look this up and make sure that you apply the correct torque to your wheel to ensure that it's tight enough when it goes out on the road. And when the weight is on the car, I always double check the top nuts just to make sure that everything's still tight. Okay, so we've just come back from road test, no more clonks, she's driving fine. As always, if you've ever replaced anything to do with the suspension, it's a good idea to get the tracking checked and adjusted. So that's what we're going to do now, but we're going to save that for a different video. As always guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and please subscribe to the channel, like this video, please leave a comment and click here to see more.